Welcome to another edition of the Flom Leadership Academy podcast series. My name is Ed Bennett, and today we have a topic I think is near and dear to everybody's hearts, and that's how to be an effective public speaker. We certainly have an individual today who's very well qualified to address that topic. He's the Associate Dean for Research at The Ohio State University College of Optometry. He's the President-elect of the American Academy of Optometry, and he is world-renowned for his research in children and myopia, and he is Dr. Jeff Walline. Jeff, welcome today.
Thank you very much.
Now let's start at the beginning. Why is being an effective public speaker important and maybe enjoyable in optometry?
Yeah, I think it's really important because in general, if you're public speaking, you're talking about your passion. And you've got to get the word out to people about your passion. What better way to do it than by speaking publicly? It's really an effective way to educate the public. It's an effective way to get your message across as a leader. There's lots of reasons that you might want to be involved in public speaking. I know it's everyone's biggest fear, but if you can overcome that fear, there's lots of benefits to it. So aside from being able to get your message across to people, you also might be able to travel the world. You get to meet a whole lot of people. And the part that people don't think about is you can learn a lot by presenting publicly, because there's always a discussion after or during your presentation, and that's when you can really learn from other people's experiences, and hopefully it makes you a better presenter all the way.
Well, isn't that nice? It's very, very true that you have that opportunity to find something really enjoyable, a great sidelight, and have the opportunity to share your knowledge, which is wonderful. Well, you've been asked, and this is shocking, to present on the topic of myopia management today.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I know. What all do you do in preparation for this lecture?
It depends on the lecture, it depends on who I'm lecturing to, but in general, I'm lucky enough to have the information sort of at hand, but I never just do the same presentation over and over. So I generally want to change it up a little bit, maybe present it in a different manner. It depends on who I'm speaking to. I might take some old information to put in there, or I might look for new information to put in there, depending on the audience. So it's got to be geared toward every single audience. And it also makes it way more exciting. If you're doing the same presentation over and over and over, you tend to lose some of that excitement and some of that interest. So, I'm generally changing that talk up quite a bit. I know a lot of people want to change their slides until the very last minute. I don't ever worry about that. Once I'm done with the slides maybe a week in advance, I don't ever do that again. I can change my message at any time, but I'm not reading my slides, so I don't need to change them up to the very last minute. I think there's lots of things that really make it fun and interesting, and that's generally what I'm doing is just sort of tweaking things. And then before I give the presentation, I make sure that I look through the whole presentation probably a couple of times. I don't necessarily do it out loud. I just look through it because I want to be able to know when I'm about halfway done. I want to be able to know when I'm getting close to finished so that I can make sure that I finish on time. If you don't know where you're at in your presentation, it makes it really difficult to do that. And so that's generally what I do is just last-minute preparation is looking at the slides and making sure I know what's there.
Well, that's a key point, Jeff, because so many people, they make one or two mistakes, and talking to people who are just getting involved and not experienced like you, but they either have too much material, they really don't allow for questions, or they speak so fast because of the obvious, little bit of anxiety that you have that they get done way too early. And to do the practice is outstanding.
Yeah, and one of the things about myopia management actually is that the crowd is very interactive. They ask a lot of questions, and sometimes you can't get through your whole presentation because they're asking so many questions. And so you have to learn how to tell the story in a very quick manner, or you can provide anecdotal evidence, things like that, to tell a longer story if the crowd isn't asking any questions. So you really have to adjust on the fly.
That's a really important point. How many times have we seen people that are running behind, likely because of questions, and all of a sudden they just decide to just fly through, and they're just clicking away, and that just, what you said really resonates, and find a natural endpoint. Just you're prepared and make it sound like this is the way it's supposed to go. And that's really good advice.
One of the things I do as a seasoned presenter, I try to literally, I watch the timer and try to end on the second, just as a way to challenge myself sometimes. That's usually my goal in doing one of these presentations, is trying to end on the second.
And I'll tell you what, that's greatly appreciated by the other parties, because when people run over, it really is, the evaluations, what they feel about you, what they're learning just starts stopping, basically.
Absolutely.
So that's a great pearl. So you're going to go to the venue. How early? What do you want to do immediately prior to the lecture?
Oh, yeah. So if there's a whole bunch of lectures all together, I want to try and get there before all of them start, so that I can go up on the stage and I can look at, how I'm going to change slides. I always want to confirm that I wasn't supposed to put my talk somewhere as opposed to just bringing my computer up. I want to make sure that I know exactly how it's going to happen. Speaking of that, I always bring my presentation in two manners, one on my computer and one on a USB drive usually, just to be prepared, just to make sure. Because you do enough presenting, you forget what you're supposed to do at this particular venue, so you want to be prepared. But then when I get on stage, first thing I look for is a clock. And in these big rooms, there's generally not just a clock that you can take a look at. So I always make sure that I have my phone out and turned on so that it doesn't go to sleep. And I put a clock on that is in the time zone that I'm actually in while presenting, so that I know exactly when I should end. And you got to know exactly what time you should end, because sometimes they end at 10 till, sometimes they end at half after. So you got to know exactly when you're supposed to end and watch the clock.
Well, that's a real key point as well. How many times have we been at lectures and the lecturer is going, how many minutes do I have left?
Yeah, exactly.
Wait a minute, let me check.
Yeah.
And that just really takes away from the presentation. And I know times I try to get there early because I want to make sure, just what you said, but you want to make sure about the microphone, you want to make sure about the lighting. And then if you're not following other people, you want to get there to make sure everything's all set up, because people will come up and go, hey, Jeff,
exactly.
How are you?
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, because AV can be difficult sometimes, and you want to feel confident going into it.
That's right.
That's a great comment. So you've mentioned some, Jeff. What are some pearls that help you during the lecture to make it successful?
Yeah. What I tell all my students is tell a story. So you don't want to just read a slide. You don't want to tell exactly what's on the slide. You want to make the slide tell a story for you. I use evidence-based information, so I've always got a graph, but I don't talk about the graph necessarily. I talk about the point that the graph is making. And I think that's the way you ultimately tell the story, but in an evidence-based manner. So that's one of my tips is make sure that you're talking to what's written on the slide, but that you're not reading the slide. Absolutely. You've got to be engaged. Hopefully what you're talking about is your passion, and you've got to show that passion. You want other people to be as excited, because they aren't going to actually do anything that you tell them unless that you get them excited. So I think that's very important. I'm making sure that the crowd understands that they can ask questions, because that's the most important part. If there's something that I'm unclear of or that I forget to say, then they need to have those questions answered. Otherwise, again, they aren't going to be able to follow my passion. So, I try to make sure that the crowd understands that they can ask questions at any time. They don't have to raise their hand. They don't have to do anything. Just shout out a question. I'll try and get to them. I think those are some of the things that I try and keep in mind.
Yeah, good points. And talking about questions, obviously you let them ask during the presentation. Mm-hmm. That makes good sense, as well as at the end. Any tips on how to handle questions? Yeah,
I try to answer questions succinctly but fully, and that's not easy to do. But if somebody asks a question and you talk for 5 minutes, they're going to miss your point. Mm-hmm. You've got to do it in 30 seconds or less, otherwise you miss the point. The other important thing to do is to always repeat the question, because they don't have a microphone, the people asking the questions, so the crowd doesn't know what they're asking. So try to repeat the questions to make sure that people really get the full understanding of what's being said up on stage. And then, I think it's just welcoming the questions. I've had stupid questions, but you say, oh, I really like that. This is, you make up something to make everybody feel welcome, like they have a question. And I've had people ask, a question just 2 questions later, they ask the exact same question. And you don't say, that's the one I just answered. You just give them the same answer, and you try and change it up just a little bit and make them feel comfortable, so they will ask.
Well, that serves 2 purposes. It shows how professional you are, because the people in the audience are going, well, why is he or she asking that question?
Yeah.
But you handle it very professionally. And secondly, just as if you're teaching students, if you don't handle it in a positive way, then other people aren't going to ask questions, and learning will be impaired. So that's a great way to handle questions. I think some of the things when we see during lectures, and I've seen it even here at the Academy meeting, when you're introducing, this might be, for example, the Optometric Society meeting. That might be what your first lecture is going to be, or you're going to be president of the society. So one of your responsibilities is public speaking, introducing your monthly continuing education guest, and what we see a lot of is not putting time into the presentation. This is, if I'm talking to Jeff Walline, and Jeff Walline is giving his first presentation ever, and it's at the society meeting, he's going to be nervous, and what you do as presenting him is you're going to tell him what a tremendously qualified person this is. Right. So now, Jeff, they feel more comfortable with you, you feel more comfortable. And Walline is not a difficult name to pronounce, but there are names that are difficult. You can use Google today. I saw this recently, introducing a whole series of people, mispronouncing a whole series of names, and you need to take the time to really make this a very good moment. So that said, Jeff, what are some of the, and you've mentioned this as well, what are some of the challenges you face when you're giving these presentations?
Yeah, one big challenge I've had is somebody from the audience basically wanted to tell a story, and it was a story that was going on and on and on. So you've got to figure out how to, in a nice way, interrupt that person and then move forward, because you can't have people telling stories from the audience. So the way to do that is just to interrupt. You quite frankly have to interrupt. But say, I really like that point, and then you make the point again, and then move on as quickly as you possibly can. And if people are raising their hands, quite frankly, sometimes you might know the person, you might not, but you've got an idea. You might not go back to them. So you've got to keep that in mind all the way. There are always technical glitches. You've got to be prepared for that, especially if you're early in your career. I would always bring my slides on paper. You should try to avoid using those slides while you're doing your presentation, because you always fall behind. If you're turning the page after every slide, you will forget to turn a page. I can guarantee it. And then you have to flip really quickly and get back to it, and that's distracting for everybody. But if the technology doesn't work, you've got to have a backup. So then you can just speak to your slides and talk to the audience without the audio or without the visual part to it. So you've got to be prepared for that. There are distractions in the audience. There always are. It could be a sleeping person. It could be a noisy person. Their phones will go off. I can guarantee you that. You've got to do your very best to just ignore that. Sometimes, if something is really distracting to you over here, then concentrate over here. Just move your focus to another place until that distraction is neutralized, I guess. So those are just some of the tips. You can't let that get to you.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because the focus should always be on the audience. Yeah. You have to look at notes. You can have those on your computer. You can glance at them, but the focus should be. If someone comes in late and you look away at them, you lose the audience. Yeah. If people are distracting you in the audience and you're glaring at them, you lose the audience. And the focus, that's outstanding point, should always be on the audience. I think one of the first continuing education seminars I gave, a good friend of mine who was lecturing as well in the program, Dr. Bob Grohe, came up to me afterwards and said, "Ed, what a unique presentation," which was a nice way of saying, "Ed, I can't believe you read your entire presentation." So I think for all our younger attendees are really learning how to do it, we'll definitely tell you how not to. There are challenges in that regard. What advice would you give to, we do have a lot of people who are watching this or listening to this that really want to get more involved in public speaking, and what are any tips you might have, Jeff, that might help them prepare?
Yeah, my number one tip is don't do a presentation unless you know the material well. I've been asked to present on something that I didn't know very well, and it was a disaster every time I've tried it. So I no longer will do a presentation that somebody else suggests that I should do. I've got to be the expert. I don't want the audience to know more than I do. So stick to what you know is my first thing. Second thing is you're going to be nervous, but as you get more experience, the anxiety goes away a little bit, but there will always be some level of anxiety. I'm sure as great of a speaker as you are, there is some level of anxiety even before you begin. But that's the anxiety ultimately that gives you the energy to get through your talk. Once you get going, you don't even realize that you're anxious anymore, and it's just fun and interesting. But getting to that starting point is there. So don't let that scare you away, is really my point ultimately. My first public presentation, scientific public presentation, was probably the worst ever presentation given at the American Academy of Optometry. But I persevered, and now I have fun doing it. So my message is just keep doing it. It gets better.
Yeah, that's well said. And that is true. It's one of those things, the more you do, the better you get.
Yeah.
The more comfortable you feel.
Yeah.
And the more enjoyable the whole process is.
Yeah. People can also do things like, they can present to themselves in the mirror, they can present to their friends, somebody who will be able to critique what they say, not just the content, but the way you deliver it. We all have a tick, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
People will identify that for you and help you try to keep that from coming into your lexicon sort of thing. So there's lots of those kinds of things. It's having people watching. I videotape yourself, which is the worst. But if you do it, it can be very helpful. Mm-hmm. But that's one way that people might be able to get better.
Yeah, I would totally agree in the sense that videotaping is critical. And I'll tell you why. Several years ago, I got a virus, a bad virus, the virus. And I was around a couple of people that always use in every sentence,
Yes.
So I caught it, and there's no vaccination for that.
No, there is not.
So you catch it when you're videotaping yourself, and then you work hard to eliminate it. And that's where you think you gave the great presentation.
Yeah.
And you've got us, or you've got the virus, or some problem of that nature.
Listen to us. We're videotaping things still. We've got to update our lexicon. We're not videotaping anymore.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, I'm 102 years old, Jeff, so we're videotaping. Drawing this to a close, now you've come to the summary of your presentation. Mm-hmm. How do you want to end it?
I always want to end it with takeaway points. So my last slide is always a summary of everything that I've talked about, and the summary is the most important points to take away. Mm-hmm. So I generally will have one, maybe two slides, depending on the length of the talk, that tells everything that I absolutely want people to take away from this. Even if they take away nothing else, those are the important things. So that's how I try and end a talk. And the very last thing I do is let people know, either I can stay and answer questions now, or if I can't for some reason, then I give them contact information so that they can contact me later. And a lot of people worry, oh my gosh, I'll get so many emails that I can't deal with. You never do. You get a few, and those are the people who you make as friends down the road. So I try to offer my contact information so that people can get a hold of me if they have other questions.
That's perfect, and they really appreciate it. There's no doubt about it, and that opportunity, and just opens that door for them. And you're the type of person I think people feel real comfortable in approaching. That's important.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is.
When you're a public speaker,
yeah.
It's really greatly appreciated.
And one thing related to that, I used to say, hey, give me your card and I'll contact you later. Mm-hmm. Never do that. Make them contact you, because it's not your responsibility. So that's another piece of advice for beginning speakers.
Yeah, no, that's very true. It can be easy to have the world of myopia on your shoulders, and I know you get contacted a lot, but again, it is just so appreciated. People express that frequently, and they should. Yeah. It's an important part. Anything else, Jeff, before we conclude today? Any final?
No, I think you said it once. I think people are most afraid of public speaking. Their second biggest fear is death. Is that right? Well, it is something scary, but it is something that you have to do if you want to be a leader. It really is part of leadership. It may not be a scientific talk. It may not be a CE presentation. It may just be introducing a topic or talking to people about, what you want to accomplish, those kinds of things. It's very necessary. It is very scary. But again, you've got to get through that. You've got to put yourself through some of those scary times to ultimately get to the place where you can effectively talk without as much stress or strain about it. So just keep trying. You will eventually learn to be a great presenter.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Could not say it better. Well, I want to thank Dr. Jeff Walline for an outstanding presentation on a very important topic. And thank you for attending one in a series of educational programs from the Flom Leadership Academy.